Hi, welcome to this lecture on globalization of consumption and production markets. First, I want to start this discussion by pointing out some big changes that are happening today in the business context. Here in the slide, you have a list of these changes, and we are going to go through them one by one. Of course, most of these changes reflect the recent financial and economic crisis. So, for example, volatility of resources and volatility of prices is something that is a recent phenomenon, is very strong in some specific markets. So, for example, the market of copper, aluminium, this phenomenon is very strong. There are some countries really monopolizing the availability of these resources, and the prices is fluctuating a lot. Of course, this kind of situation in the business context, pushes companies to develop new purchasing strategies, and it's also affecting, of course, business operations and global manufacturing strategies. Another important aspect is, of course, impending regulation. Regulation is, characterizing all markets, and in some industries regulation can be very strong and really affecting the industrial dynamics. So if you consider, for example, an industry like the automotive industry, the manufacturing strategies are really linked to the evolution of the regulation in the sector. Demanding customers. Today, customers look for innovative products, so corporates need to engage heavily with innovation of products and innovation of services. These put a lot of pressure on all kinds of business operations. There is also a lot of pressure coming from investors. In particular, investors want to see projects that break even in the short term, want to see business operations that are very efficient, and this again is changing significantly the context in which corporates operate. As a consequence of the crisis, there is also evidence of the appearing of new markets and the evaporation of old ones. This is something very common in a crisis period, and it gives, for example, a lot of opportunities to start up, to emerge in new markets. There is also evidence that companies have problems in attracting and retaining talents. This is a problem because, of course, knowledge and skills are essentials in business to develop the organization, and therefore this is a big problem for corporations today. There are changes in financial operations. Today it's more complex for corporates to access credit. So again, this call for rethinking manufacturing strategies. It's also interesting the more collaborative approach demonstrated by corporations in the recent times. Large corporations often operate in different markets. So, for example, for instance, if you consider a company like General Electrics, they work in manufacturing, but they also work in the real estate, they work in the finance industry. And it's interesting that companies that might be competitors in one industry could be partners in another industry. So this creates some interesting industrial and business dynamics. Another important pressure today is coming from a variety of stakeholders. As you know, there is a lot of attention and pressure for corporates in reference to what is called the triple bottom line of business. This means the economy, the environment, and the society. So society is a stakeholder that today is affecting business evolution and business dynamics. There is another aspect that is really characterizing recent times is a growing economic uncertainty. This again, is a big pressure for companies because it, for example, stresses how investments are made, what is the return of investments, and basically pushes for a greater attention to risk management. In such a context, of course, there is a need to develop and cultivate a culture for resilience, and generally speaking, companies spend a lot of effort in developing strong strategies, strong manufacturing operations in order to succeed in markets that are very turbulent today. Now, of course, the largest phenomenon that has, really changed the world in the recent times is globalization, and this has, impacted significantly in business operations. What is globalization? Is first of all a growing integration of world's economies and societies. Is something that is both a quantitative and qualitative change, and is something that is not only economic. You will, discuss globalization in other courses, and there is a lot of literature explaining the characteristics of this phenomenon that is typically measured by four dimensions: space, regularity, this means the intensity of global interactions, the speed of the process, and the depth of the process. This means the impact on of this phenomenon on corporates, on governments, on the quality of life of people. In reference to business and economics, there are some key characteristics of globalization that are relevant for our discussion. Number one is that it opens countries to free trade. Number two, it opens currency markets. And number three, pushes often for the privatization of businesses. There are two components of globalization that we are going to discuss today. The first one is the globalization of consumption markets, and the second one is the globalization of production markets. First of all, I want to show you a video that is related to the perspective of a well-known leader, Barack Obama, the President of the United States, on globalization. This is an interesting video because it shows what are the trade-offs connected to globalization, the advantages and the disadvantages. Of course, corporates and governments and countries need to approach globalization in a positive way. They need to try to benefit of the opportunities that are offered by globalization. Now, let's start discussing globalization of production. Globalization of production is something that really characterizes many products today. So if you consider, for example, a TV, today you could easily find a TV. In this case, there is the example of Vizio, which is an American brand, where the TV is designed in a small office in California, is assembled in Mexico with components coming from South Korea, China and the United States. So this is a classic example of globalization of production and a classic example of a global manufacturing approach in business. Now, why this this is possible? Why is economically sustainable to get components and products coming from all over the world, travel all these components around and manage the cost of logistics and so on? Basically, this is possible for a number of reasons. The first reason is the fact that today, thanks to the globalization phenomenon, it's very easy to trade and move products from one country to another one. So if you analyze the average tariff rates on manufactured products, the cost has significantly decreased over time. Also, global manufacturing is attractive because, of course, there are countries where the cost of labor is very low, and this is only one of the reasons, it's the predominant reason, and that therefore corporates decide to move manufacturing activities in these countries. What is important to note is that globalization is not only about products, it's also about services. So outsourcing of services is today a common activity, part of business operations. In this slide, you have a number of pictures that we are going to discuss that refer to different outsourcing processes that are very common today. I will start from the right. On the right, you have a picture of an X-ray. Why an X-ray picture in an outsourcing discussion? Because, for example, in the United States, it's very common that hospitals outsource in developing countries, particularly in India, the analysis of X-rays, the analysis of X-rays. There are a number of benefits to do that. The first one is that you can benefit of the time distance. So when, for example, in Asia is day, in the United States is night, so you can substantially run operations 24 hours. The second aspect is cost, so it's easier, it's cheaper to perform this activity in India than in the United States. And the third aspect is the fact that you can find the people with the right skills. So, for example, in India, the language is not a barrier, and you can find a lot of people, a lot of graduates in medicine. This activity is not particularly complex to perform, so outsourcing of the X-rays analysis is something that today is very common in American hospitals. The second case is the case of R&D activities. All companies push innovation of products, push innovation of technologies. Again, R&D is something that often calls for using competencies that are not in-house. So outsourcing of R&D is something that today is a common practice and is typically performed globally. Another example are call centers. A great example is the financial industry in the UK. Most of banks and finance institutions in the UK have outsourced call centers to India. Again, they do it because it's cheaper, because the language is not a barrier, and because India has developed expertise in managing this kind of operations. Another example is related to ERP systems. ERP systems are softwares, platforms used by companies in order to manage data related to business operations. ERP systems require maintenance, require to run on large data centers, and again, often these data centers today are not located anymore in the company, but are located somewhere else, possibly in other countries, often developing countries, where the service of maintenance is provided through cloud services. The last example I wanted to mention is also the example of secretary services. Today, large organizations control operations on a 24-hour basis. So it's very common, for example, that CEOs of Fortune 500 companies have secretaries located in different continents so as to manage operations on a 24-hour basis. I also wanted to go more in depth in this discussion and explain you what are the classic outsourcing reasons. Of course, the predominant reason in an outsourcing process is cost. So companies engage and develop outsourcing processes in order to reduce operating cost. This is typically the predominant reason at the base of an outsourcing or delocalization process. But what is important to understand is that this is not the unique reason, but there are other reasons as well. These data I'm showing you come from a research that was performed a few years ago from a consultancy firm at Kearney that investigated the practice of outsourcing in Fortune 500 companies. And basically what they found is that the companies do not only engage because of cost, but also, for example, because they can access new competencies they need. So going back to the example I gave before, in India, for example, you can find very strong competencies in the field of high-tech, telecommunication, engineering, so information engineering. So while moving your operations in a country like India, you do not only save on cost, but actually you can find at the local level very qualified people that are essential for developing your business and for managing properly your operations. So outsourcing is not only because of cost, it's also because of accessing new competencies or talented people. The third reason for outsourcing, at the base of outsourcing processes, is the possibility of generating new revenue. There is evidence that often companies that outsource activities in other countries, at a certain point they establish business operations in these countries and they try to generate revenue at the local level by offering products and services in these countries. Why they do it? There is a very basic reason. By outsourcing or delocalizing activities abroad, companies develop understanding of these countries, of the dynamics of markets in these countries, and therefore at a certain point they have the right knowledge to enter that markets commercially. So it's very interesting that in outsourcing processes there are several dynamics, and these typically include first approaching outsourcing for saving on costs, then the access to specific competencies, and last the possibility of generating revenue. Globalization of markets is of course today a reality. In the past, it was common that in each country you had specific companies in different industries. Today you have worldwide companies. So this globalization of markets and products is something very strong and is really something characteristic of the last 40 years. This is demonstrated by many data. In this slide you have reported the ratio of world exports of goods and commercial services, that of course is booming, and this is an indicator of the globalization of markets. Now, it's important to understand how this globalization of markets and production affects value creation processes at the base of company activities. In other classes, you might have studied the framework called the value chain. The value chain is a framework that is very popular in the strategy field, has been created by a well-known academic from Harvard Business School, Professor Michael Porter. And the value chain scheme is a very basic framework to describe processes happening in corporations. So basically, in this framework, primary activities and the support activities are identified. And as you can see, primary activities consist of inbound logistics operations, this means manufacturing activities, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, and after-sale services, and support activities or secondary processes include procurement, technology development, human resources management, and the management of the firm infrastructure. Now, this framework is very useful because it can be used for analyzing business activities from different perspectives. So, for example, has been used for performance measurement in order to develop metrics to measure the performance of a company, has been used to drive sustainability initiatives, can be used in different ways. Now, let's for our discussion use a simplified version of this frame. In this simplified version, we substantially identify three key activities that bring to value creation. When I say value creation, I mean the value that is created through the commercialization of products and services. So I'm referring in this case particularly to economic value. Now, let's analyze these three key steps that compose value creation. So, the first set of activities is related to the understanding of market needs and the consequent development of products. This, of course, is a very important activity at the base of any business. The second key activity is the production of these products. So as soon as you have identified the need and you have designed a product, you need to produce it. And then the third activity is to bring products to customers and to manage after-sales processes. Now, what I wanted to do now is discuss with you what are the most important activities. This means looking at these three activities. Is manufacturing or is the first activity of understanding market needs and developing new products, or is after sales? Now, there is evidence that these activities have been perceived differently over time. So, for example, if we consider the beginning of the 20th century, what was the real value was manufacturing. This means manufacturing, the capability of manufacturing was really making the difference in the success of companies. So if you consider, for example, when in the early years of the 20th century, Ford introduced the first commercial car. Basically, at that time, they didn't carry out market research. They didn't analyze the market needs. They simply developed the capability to produce, to manufacture a car, and that was the driver of success in the market. At that time, they were not performing any kind of after-sale services. So at the beginning, manufacturing was the most important, the most valuable activity in value creation. Today, the situation has substantially changed. In fact, in order to succeed, companies really need to understand what is the demand in the market and really need to push innovation in order to develop new products that are successful in the market. So today, this activity is the most valuable one in the process of value creation. Manufacturing is the one that today is taken less into consideration because there is such a development of technology and such an understanding of manufacturing that is today most of the industries are considered a kind of commodity. And this explains why companies easily outsource manufacturing to other companies, because it's not anymore strategic, it's not anymore a strategic element of the business. Last, today there is also great attention to logistics activity and to after-sale activities. So what we have experienced in the last years is a change in value and the different importance of processes in business and manufacturing activities. It's also important to understand that the value chain is today geographically fragmented, and this is really a consequence of global manufacturing strategies. So if we, for example, identify in A, B, C, D, E, and F some key processes, including, for example, let's say ABC, it refers to marketing and the development of products. D is manufacturing. E and F is the assembly of the products. And then we have the commercialization and after sales. It's very common today to find the companies that, for example, develop products in the UK, manufacture components in developing countries. They bring back the components to the UK and they assemble the products in the UK. They commercialize these products in several countries in the world, and they perform after-sale services from other countries, for example India, located abroad. So basically, this geographical fragmentation of the value chain is something that, of course, creates a great element of complexity of business operations. So processes today are fragmented geographically. Another important aspect, evidence to note, is that not only these processes are fragmented geographically, but often are carried out by different organizations. So when, for example, I establish an outsourcing process, I create a supplier. A supplier, a vendor, is a new stakeholder of my business and is becoming an actor, a player in my global manufacturing strategy. So this creates, again, additional complexity, because not only I have processes that are geographically fragmented, but I also have to coordinate different partners, different actors that are part of this global manufacturing system. Something I also wanted to point out is a change that is happening in many industries, and is a change related to new business approaches that are called product service strategies or product service systems. In the past, there was a very clear distinction between companies offering products and companies offering services. This distinction is not clear anymore. So today if you go to purchase, for example, a car, a Porsche, you do not only purchase the product, but the retailer is going to offer you the maintenance service, is going to offer you the insurance service, and is going to offer you the financial scheme to purchase the car. What is important to note is that even if these services, these additional services, could come from different providers. So, for example, Porsche could offer a financial scheme through HSBC Bank. Basically, you purchase the service at the retailer of the car. So this is a radical change for business operations, because first of all, the retailer needs to develop new skills. But what is interesting is that in that case, the industry, the retailer, is moving from selling, commercializing only products forward the commercialization of products and the services that are related to the product. This approach is called product service systems and is today becoming more popular. Why companies, why corporates engage with these kind of approaches? They do it because there is evidence that in a service environment, margins are higher. So it makes a lot of sense for product-oriented companies to commercialize services, because they can, in this way, increase the profitability of the business. Another aspect that is really an outcome of the globalization phenomenon is the concept of asymmetric competition. While in the past small companies were competing with small companies and large companies were competing with large companies, today this situation is mixed. So in the same market you might have small and medium enterprises competing with large enterprises. I want to show you now a video. This is an HSBC recent advert that again explain how markets are really becoming global today, and how small companies should be prepared to compete with large corporations.
Thank heaven for little girls, for little girls get bigger every day. Thank heaven for little girls, they grow up in the most delightful way.
Lemonade is 50 cents. I take Hong Kong dollars. That's it, Auntie.
What?
Nayam Guma.
Thank heaven for them
Bye.
all, no matter where, no matter who. Without them, what would little boys do? Thank heaven. Thank heaven.
At HSBC, we believe that in the future, even the smallest business will be multinational.
Now, let me summarize the learning from this lecture. Here I want to quote Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin said, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change." Now, this is a very interesting quote and really applies to business. Let me end this with a metaphor. Thousands of years ago, there were dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were the biggest, the most powerful animals in the planet. More or less at the same time, there were giraffes. Now, giraffes are still here today, dinosaurs are not. Why? Because giraffes have been able to react to environmental changes, and the species has adapted over time. Dinosaurs were not able to do the same, and as a consequence of that, disappeared. This metaphor really applies to business. If corporates do not anticipate environmental changes, are not able to succeed in business. So it's very important that corporates understand dynamics, understand the changes in the business context, and develop strategies and adapt operations in a way to survive and successfully compete in the business environment.